Ink Ribbon.
Now, we all love Resident Evil, but let's be honest, some parts of the franchise we'd all change or fix if we were in charge. But as fans, we can still complain if we want to. I personally believe that every good game should have a part of it that players hate. I think it gives gamers more to talk about, forces them to help each other build strategies and share tips, and it can just really provide a challenge for those who crave it. So, after putting out a poll asking you guys what the areas of Resident Evil games you hated the most are, I compiled it into this list. In no particular order, here are 10 of the worst areas in Resident Evil.
Number 10.
Hunter Hallway. This narrow corridor is infamous for the way it ramps up the tension. In Resident Evil 1, the Hunter Hallway forces you into a claustrophobic chase where every step could mean a surprise attack by one of the most notorious enemies in the games, and as we all know, they can swipe your head off at any moment. You're basically trapped in this tiny space, constantly chased by these quick, deadly hunters, and it's super cramped, leaving you with hardly any room to move or escape or dodge. Every step feels risky, knowing these hunters could just jump out. And there's even more of them in the remake. When I play Resident Evil 1, I actually will go the long way and avoid this hallway because I just don't want to deal with the hunters. But this hallway is a standout part of the game, not just because it's scary, but because it's so frustratingly challenging. Getting cornered by a hunter with nowhere to go is a real unforgettable gut punch, especially if you haven't saved in over an hour.
Number 9.
G-Monster Sewer Nest. The sewers in Resident Evil 2 Remake are absolutely disgusting, and when you think they can't get more gross, then you end up in this weird, horrible nest intestine thing. I don't even know what this room is supposed to be, but it's terrifying. And on top of that, it's sort of out of the way, not near any save points or anything, so if you don't have ammo, you have to go all the way back to fight these G-monsters. And on top of that, if they poison you, then you're really screwed, because then you have to look for a blue herb. It's just really frustrating, and as if it can't get worse, it leads to that stupid puzzle room, and I don't know, this area just sucks. I hate going to this part of the sewers, and apparently I'm not the only one.
Number 8.
The Chain Pulling Room, Resident Evil 5. In Resident Evil 5, the Chain Pulling Room was meant to inject a bit of puzzle solving into the action. However, it's slow and long and interrupts the game's flow, making it a slog to get through, and one of the few places where the game can sometimes be even more confusing when playing co-op. The idea was cool. Players would have to figure out a chain sequence and work together to move forward, a nice little puzzle, but honestly, it didn't really work out. Instead of being a fun challenge, it just ended up frustrating a lot of people.
Number 7.
Tanker Section, Resident Evil 7. This part of Resident Evil 7 throws you into an oddly disjointed section, often remembered as the Tanker Mia sequence, where the atmospheric tension suddenly gives way to confusing design choices. It tries to mix intense horror with narrative beats involving Mia, but the shift in pace and cramped environment sometimes just disrupts the immersion, making it one of the more awkwardly placed segments in the game. They're trying to do horror, but also drop a bunch of story about Mia on you, and it just feels a bit all over the place. And one thing that makes it different from wandering around the Baker house is that now you're just stuck in these narrow hallways and can't really explore much outside the linear path. Plus, the Mia focus feels a bit out of nowhere and kind of kills the flow. Honestly, it's probably just the most awkward part of the game. It messes with the atmosphere, doesn't give you that much to do, and just throws a very sudden change at you without ever having a real satisfying payoff.
Number 6.
The on-rail sections. The parts of Resident Evil 5 where you're driving through the desert and shooting at stuff, capped off by a boss fight, was designed to deliver a blockbuster cinematic moment. Unfortunately, forcing you into these shooting sections just takes away from that feeling of agency. The lack of control combined with the pressure of a boss encounter makes for a sequence that's as rigid as it is intense, leaving some players feeling boxed in rather than exhilarated. And the worst part is, on the harder difficulties, it's one of the cheapest and most difficult boss fights, where you have to basically have perfect timing and accuracy, or you're pretty much guaranteed to die. And on single player, you don't have to worry about your partner, but in co-op, you and your partner have to bring your A game, or you can prepare to play this boss fight about 50 times before you hopefully win. If you're considering buying a handheld emulator to play retro games on the go, why not buy it from 2retro.com and use the code InkRibbon for 10% off? I just got the Anbernic RG34XX because I love the form factor of the original Game Boy Advance, and not only does it play GBA games, but it also plays Sega systems, PS1, and even some Dreamcast games. And yes, you can play Resident Evil on it. And one thing I want to mention that I love about this one is the buttons are not clicky. I hate clicky buttons. This one has those soft, mushy buttons that don't make any sound, so I can play it at night without waking anybody up. So use code InkRibbon for 10% off at 2retro.com. You know the deal. Now back to the video.
Number 5.
Sherry section. In this part of Resident Evil 2 Remake, the eerie orphanage and Sherry's storyline are meant to evoke a deep sense of dread and vulnerability. And it does. The segment where you play as Sherry is genuinely scary and tense. The first 3 times you play it. Once you've seen this a few times, it goes from being scary to being annoying, and you basically have to memorize patterns and hiding spots and just wait. Otherwise, you get caught by Chief Irons over and over and over. It's appreciated that they tried to mix it up, also while showing us Sherry's perspective, but it would have really been nice to offer some other ways to handle this part. Like, for example, we could have used Sherry's special ability to crawl through floor vents to escape into the hall and bypass the stealth part, or maybe just as a shortcut. I don't know, I guess if you're one of the people who really enjoyed her section, maybe explain it to us in the comments so we can understand.
Number 4.
Final Nemesis. Taking on Nemesis is never a walk in the park, but the final fight room in Resident Evil 3 Remake will break your spirit. And if you didn't have a hard time with it, then you didn't play it in Inferno mode. The design leaves you with barely any safe space, and every misstep is brutally punished. In the hardest difficulty, this fight requires absolute pinpoint precision and reflexes, where Jill goes from being a member of STARS to being Neo from the Matrix. Now, difficulty aside, there's also the glaring issue that the lab section and this room just don't pack the same punch as the original, being so different that it really doesn't even feel like the same room or fight. Oh, Resident Evil 3 Remake. What could have been.
Number 3.
Double Garrador room. If you played Resident Evil 4 Remake on hardcore mode, then you most likely hit a major roadblock when you reached this room. Now, this is not as simple as it seems. First, you have to go through the ballroom, which is filled with multiple waves of novistadors, just for you people who are scared of bugs, and that alone is an extreme challenge. But then you have to go through the antechamber, aka the double Garrador room. And then you have to fight not only multiple waves of enemies coming at you, but also the 2 Garradors walking around, and you have to take everyone out without making any noise, or if you're like me, while running around and screaming for your life and hoping not to have your head chopped off. Oh, and also on hardcore, there's no autosaves, so if you die, I hope you saved after fighting all the novistadors, because you're gonna have to do that part all over again too. And then you have a boss fight afterwards. Chapter 10 on hardcore is absolutely sadistic.
Number 2.
Cargo plane. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Code Veronica is the game that actually needs a remake. I did a whole video if you want to hear the ramblings of a Resi fanboy, but I have to say that the moment that Code Veronica's design falls apart has to be when you're on the plane leaving the island. Then you have one of the most notoriously hated boss fights in the series. Cramped in a tiny space, you're forced to fight the tyrant, who is almost impossible to dodge. On one end, you have an open cargo door where Claire can be yeeted from one hit if you get too close, and on the other side you have a catapult, which is slow but helpful, and also the only way to actually win the fight. But the problem is, first-time players have very little preparation for this fight, and it's very easy to show up empty-handed, with players either not having enough ammo, health, or both. And most tragic of all, the grenade launcher, which is very easy to miss and leave behind if you don't know where it is. From what I've observed from the community, this is typically where people stop playing Code Veronica, which is such a shame. If you're one of those people who only played up to there and gave up, I encourage you to push through and try again. Use cheats if you have to. Just experience the game. It's really good, I promise.
Number 1.
Water Room, Resident Evil 4. Now, this is widely considered to be the most difficult part of the original Resident Evil 4. You're faced with an enormous amount of enemies coming in multiple waves, all while escorting Ashley. It sounds simple enough, but when you factor in the shielded enemies, the snipers, the fact that they're coming from all directions, it can be really overwhelming, especially on professional difficulty. And I have to say, in VR, this room is anxiety-inducing because you can literally feel them all coming at you at once, and I could feel my fight or flight reflex kicking in. But the saving grace of this room, for those who struggle and really don't want to deal with it, is the ability to cheese it and abuse the save system. Every time you leave and re-enter this room, it activates a checkpoint. So you can take out some enemies, leave, and come back, and repeat until they're all dead. Sorry to give you this tip 20 years after the game came out, but better late than never, right? Now, obviously these aren't the only areas in Resident Evil that have brought us frustration, so if there's one that you feel should have been on this list, let me know down in the comments, and be sure to take out that like button before it swipes your head off. And be sure to check out my channel for more Resident Evil content than anyone should ever make. Until next time, I'm Kai Morgan, and as always, thanks for watching Ink Ribbon.